Welcome back to Module 2 of the CoC 101 training series. Module 2 will focus all about the makeup of the continuum of care. So what is a continuum of care? So continuum of care, the term CoC, often folks think about it in terms of funding. So CoC funding, which is a pot of money from HUD for communities to address homelessness. And that is correct. That is one definition of CoC, which is CoC program funding. However, there's a larger definition of CoC, which is really referring to a group of organizations and individuals working together in a community to promote a community-wide commitment to ending homelessness, to provide funding for those efforts, to house folks who are experiencing homelessness, to promote access to and effective use of mainstream programs and collaborate with other resources in the community, and to optimize self-sufficiency among individuals and families experiencing homelessness. So a simple definition of the CoC is this continuum of care is established by representatives of relevant organizations within a geographic area to carry out the responsibilities set forth in the CoC program interim rule. We're going to talk through all the pieces of that. So who are the representatives? What is the geographic area? And what are the responsibilities? So who are the participants of the CoC? The composition of CoC membership includes all of these areas listed below. So representatives from homeless assistance providers, victim service providers, faith-based organization, government, schools, mental health agencies, persons who are homeless or formerly homeless. These are all folks who can make up the CoC membership and are crucial pieces of addressing homelessness in a community. In terms of the geography of the Eastern Pennsylvania Continuum of Care, you can see it here on this map. It's made up of 33 counties and 5 RABs, which we'll talk about a little bit later. RABs are Regional Homeless Advisory Boards. The CoC covers nearly 21,000 square miles and includes 11 cities, including Allentown, which is Pennsylvania's 3rd largest city, 672 townships, 337 boroughs. So it's a very large continuum of care and covers a variety of different diverse needs within the CoC. Couple of things about the CoC makeup and what is expected. So the CoC has full CoC meetings open to all CoC members twice a year in April and October. And the CoC solicits new members at least once a year. However, members can join anytime. And the CoC also hosts various trainings throughout the year for both folks who get CoC funding, so those CoC grantees, as well as the larger CoC membership. We mentioned the term RAB. RAB stands for Regional Homeless Advisory Board. There are 5 RABs in the Eastern PA CoC, and each RAB is responsible for working within their community to address and end homelessness locally, and taking the policies that have been adopted by the CoC and really putting them into practice. So the 5 RABs in the Eastern PA CoC are the South Central, Lehigh Valley, Central Valley, Northern Tier, and Pocono RABs. So we noted that a responsibility of the CoC is to implement the requirements of the CoC program interim rule. So let's dive in a bit to what that means. So the CoC program interim rule is basically the regulatory requirements of the CoC program, including the CoC planning process. So all CoC recipients and subrecipients have to follow HUD's regulations in the CoC program interim rule. So let's talk through what those responsibilities are. So first of all, it's the responsibility of the CoC to operate the continuum of care. So that includes holding membership meetings at least twice a year, inviting new members to join the continuum of care, having a board and adopting a written process to select that board, appointing committees, subcommittees, or work groups. So really establishing the structure by which you're driving that community process to address homelessness locally. CoCs have to have a governance charter. So the governance charter is what establishes the different roles and responsibilities, including the CoC board, the CoC committees, HMIS lead agency, staff who support the CoC, and then the process for updating and amending the charter. CoCs have to have written standards. So the written standards are basically your policies and procedures for both CoC and ESG assistance. So those are in writing how different programs are expected to operate if they receive CoC or ESG funds. CoCs are responsible for evaluating performance. So CoCs need to establish performance targets for programs that get CoC funding, and then monitor that performance and regularly report outcomes to HUD. The CoC must establish a coordinated entry system. So the coordinated entry system we'll talk more in depth about in a later module, but ensures that all people experiencing a housing crisis have fair and equal access to services within the CoC. And that means you have a system for quickly identifying folks who are in need of housing assistance, assessing them for assistance, referring them to assistance, and then ultimately connecting those folks to permanent housing. CoCs have to design and operate the HMIS system, and HMIS stands for Homeless Management Information System. That's the database that's used by homeless service providers within the CoC. So the CoC has to establish an HMIS lead agency. So which organization, agency is going to basically operate your HMIS system? So in the Eastern Pennsylvania CoC, the Department of Community and Economic Development, DCED, is the HMIS lead agency for the CoC. CoCs are responsible for conducting the point-in-time count. So we mentioned earlier that the point-in-time count is a count on a single night in January of folks experiencing homelessness. So that is one of the responsibilities of the CoC. There's also other planning responsibilities. For example, coordinating with consolidated plan jurisdictions. So if there are other jurisdictions within your community who are responsible for submitting a consolidated plan, you should be coordinating with those folks, coordinating with ESG recipients, and ultimately establishing and implementing a community plan for how you're going to deliver homeless assistance. The CoC is also responsible for applying for HUD funding annually, and this process is called the CoC NOFA. NOFA stands for Notice of Funding Availability. So within this annual process, the CoC establishes priorities for funding projects. So what type of projects does the CoC really need and want to fund? And then the collaborative applicant, which is DCED, supported by DMA, is responsible for collecting and combining the required information from all the projects in the CoC that get CoC funding or that are been selected for new funding, and submit those to HUD. And the collaborative applicant also applies for CoC planning activity. The NOFA is a pretty involved process. Not only are you submitting all the information for all your individual projects, but the CoC also has to put together an application to HUD, basically reflecting what activities have been happening over the last year. We'll talk more about the NOFA in a later module. And just to note that, again, DCD is the collaborative applicant for the CoC, and consults with, and DMA consults with DCD. So DMA does fulfill some of these activities on behalf of the CoC, for example, applying for HUD funding, coordinating the point-in-time count, and things like that. So that's a quick overview of the makeup of the CoC. We hope to see you back for the next module.